All right, I am here with an esteemed guest. I don't use that word lightly. I am here with Matt Ehret, who is the owner of the Canadian Patriot, the author of Science Unshackled, currently and previously The Clash of Two Americas. You could find him on YouTube at the Canadian Patriot Press and on Substack at the Canadian Patriot Review. And this website, the Canadian Patriot website, you can find just a wealth of articles, videos, and all kinds of amazing content pertaining not only to Canada, but also wider geopolitics and some of the issues that we're going to get into today. So first of all, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, thank you for having me on and that very generous introduction.
It's hey, pleasure's all mine. And we were just talking about something, and I'm speedy because I want to make sure I don't forget it. You were talking about a current project that you're engaged in, which I think will cut across a lot of our audience, which is an investigation into, let's call it, occult influences in not just Canadian Parliament, although I hope we get to that, but also perhaps other secret societies and the role they play. Would that be correct?
Yeah, it's something that my more recent work on certain movies that I've been making with my wife and a filmmaker, a good friend, Jason Dahl. We've started tackling the topic of UFOs and specifically intelligence operations that have been running psychological warfare operations against, mostly, I mean, you could say that the Western population, but really the world, for a very long time. And since there's been a lot of mainstream media, corporate media promotion of UFO disclosure, and you got congressional hearings in Europe and in the U.S. and Mexico, and obviously there's an intention to amplify this narrative. And we, looking at this thing from a geopolitical, historical, epistemological standpoint, recognize that there is a lot of very shadowy agencies that are very dishonest, that have been at this for a very long time. And so we decided to turn this, some of our written work into some films. We've done a couple of episodes so far of an ongoing series on the hidden hand behind UFOs, dealing with, the role of people like Alan Dulles, leaders within the MI6, the CIA, and even before that, specifically the Fabian Society, people like H.G. Wells, who set the groundwork for what many have come to call the New World Order, well over a century ago, and a bunch of theosophists as well, who people like Annie Besant, who was also a Fabian, as was H.G. Wells, and how they created a sort of structure to revive what we've identified, my team, my wife, Jason, myself, have really recognized this as a revival of ancient pagan mystery cults that used to dominate in the days of the ancient Roman Empire. Before that, the Persian Babylonian Empire. It was a society run geopolitically, banking, culturally by cults, with initiated priests, managing the shadows in the cave wall for the plebes to believe in. And that was a very effective control mechanism. It was very debauched, and I think that it got a setback with the unveiling, or the effective victory over the pagan systems caused by the whole Judeo-Christian revolution. And they've been working very hard to subvert monotheistic systems from within for the last 2,000 years. And when you look at a lot of the roots of things like the Fabian Society that I mentioned, or the Round Table movement, they were both created around the same time as dominant think tanks of the British Empire, that played a direct role in basically trying to take over the world and bringing about this whole one world government. They are tied directly to the ancient mystery cults of things like Mithra, the cult of Mithra that ran the Roman legions, and before that was very active in Persia and Anatolia. And the Fabian Society is largely a revival of the cult of Cybele, an Earth Mother cult that interfaced closely with Mithra, and took on various forms throughout the years, practicing things like the Eleusinian mysteries, covertly, usually in underground caverns. Things like the Hellfire Club of Britain that managed the British Empire, was a driving force of the maintenance of the Eleusinian mysteries, and so this is what's also being brought about with the whole aliens, disclosure movement. It ties very closely in with the sacred drug revivalism that's also being pushed at the same time by Western governments, as all different sides of the same ultimate thing. So yeah, this video series has forced us to look at the occult in a more serious way than I'd been avoiding it because it's such a crazy thing. But I've been forcing my mind now to take it more seriously after
Well,
a
it's
lot of years.
interesting because this is a topic that pops up on our show from time to time. Because as a millennial, I was raised in an era where UFOs are part of the zeitgeist in a big part, and we kind of keep up with it, and it's in the news a lot of disclosure events, but it seems off. And we would remark, sometimes we would see, oh, this so and so high ranking member disclosure event in front of the world, in front of Congress, and then we say, okay, what happens next? And nothing seems to happen. And I say, well, that's odd. What is this? And what's interesting is that there seem to be more and more people who suspect that something's up, something is fake about this, something is wrong. This feels like when I talk to people with our sphere about UFOs, they're like, yeah, but that's just a show. What's really going on behind that? And I think that is part of the narrative as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, there's definitely. I mean, part of human history is secret science programs that are tied to military agendas. That goes back to ancient times, right? You can't let your military secrets out. A big driving force of technological progress is located in getting a job done. Now, it doesn't have to be in military situations alone that you can get that effect. In fact, it works better and it's more healthy when it's done. There's a saying, where there is no vision and the people perish. If you have a great, noble human being in a politically influential position as a leader, then they will have a tendency. Then they're very rare in human history, but when they emerge, they will challenge people to make it to do something great that's multi-generational and that can channel the forces of creative passion and unleash that creativity embedded in all babies in a way that is natural, right? However, most of the time, unfortunately, since we've been living under empire in various degrees for all of we've never broken free of that. War has been a driving experience or a driver for get a goal orientation that channels new discoveries. Unfortunately, because it occurs within a geopolitical environment, secrecy is high value. So that's part of our life. Even today, a lot of Da Vinci's work on military systems are still not even known. What machinery was developed, a lot of it was never made public. A lot of it is, but not all of it. So that's just interesting, right? How the Egyptians did a lot of the things regarding the constructions of ancient structures in Egypt. A lot of those technologies, and I'm here not referring to aliens. I'm not referring to Atlanteans. I just mean that there was advanced tech that like lenses that would allow for the melting of sulfites of sand into glass that could create different structures. Anyway, I'm getting off on a rant
No,
here, but
but
all that to
that's
say,
that's
in the current day,
interesting. I
yeah,
was going to say, because on our show, we had done a little bit of a arc on a few books on Atlantis, on these sorts of ancient myths, and then that tied into like Hyperborea and stuff like that. But it seems that every few months there's some large story about how the Sphinx is older than we thought, or the pyramids are older than we thought because of such and such an evidence. And it seems to be generally accepted now that things are much older than we used to believe. And so you have these myths of these ancient civilizations that were hand waved away, but now there's at least kind of picking around the edges of some kind of investigation into, no, I think we were far more advanced at a far earlier time than we are given credit for. And that will get you laughed out of certain science circles. But why not? Like, that actually doesn't even sound that kooky to me. It would actually sound more ridiculous that there was just these like leaps of advancement that happened fairly recently. So the idea that there was advanced technology, advanced understanding of construction at a far earlier time shouldn't sound that insane to most people. And if it does sound insane, it's because they've been brainwashed into thinking that's just something you're not supposed to talk about. Otherwise, people won't take you seriously.
Yeah, there's a lot of intimidation there, and yeah, like my point, because I didn't want to lose my trail of thought, but that's sort of the life we've been living under. There have been in the 20th century secret science programs in World War One, and especially in World War Two with the Manhattan Project, and and so people were, definitely seeing, things that were unexplained flying objects, drones, early advanced drone tech, remote controlled, using various Tesla coils, things like that. The flying saucer tech was being developed, as we know, by the Germans, and by the Italians. Had some very frontier aerospace researchers working on ways to get around radar. So, the best type of structure to avoid radar is the sphere, but a sphere doesn't fly well. So, the next best thing is to flatten the sphere, and you can sort of avoid radar pretty effectively that way. And so the saucer geometry became an obvious thing to look at. But when, a lot of these scientists were absorbed by the winning countries after World War II, and a lot of the higher Nazi, high command was basically given new jobs to create things like NATO, or we're given new employment with the MI6 and CIA apparatus under Dulles. That's a fact. That's called Operation Gladio, or NATO's secret armies. It involved also people seeing things like, unidentified flying machinery. When they look out their windows, or unvetted pilots would see something that they couldn't explain, and they would report it when they'd landed to their superior officers if they were with the military or something. And so a story had to be concocted to give people an explanation of what it was that they were seeing. And so, partially the ETs from another planet was a useful way to do that, and deflate the danger of people actually looking into what was this, this tech you weren't supposed to be developing or knowing about during the Cold War. But there's never just like one objective alone. There's multiple levels of usefulness to these types of stories, and the most useful for the oligarchy, like I said, has been the revival of a new type of religious order that would redefine or reframe what we thought Christianity was, what Jesus was, what Muhammad was, all these things, around an idea that these were people either, there's different variations of the theme, but, either they were accessing aliens from another dimension through drug use, because let's say they were all initiates of the Lucinian mysteries or something. That's one of the popular lines that people like Graham Hancock have been pushing on, a variety of platforms. Or that, Jesus was himself perhaps an alien as well. A lot of it is tied to theosophists and theosophist ideology.
And I wanted to just make a little tangent there. On our show, our listeners might recall, we discussed a book written in 1964 titled "When Prophecy Fails" by Leon Festinger. And a lot of people, like, the 60s are such a fascinating time. We've done a lot of coverage on books in and around the 60s and the counterculture movement. And during that era, 60s and 70s, there was such a rise in, and I don't think they've really gone away, especially with Scientology, but a rise in sort of UFO messianic cults. And this book followed. It's just one big, long documentation of a study they did on this one small UFO doomsday cult. And it was the same thing. It was, the center of it was just this woman who claimed that she could divine communication with this alien representative of the species. Same thing. It's that, oh, we were also Jesus. Oh, we were also Muhammad. All of your figure, anyone you could think of, we were it. And so it was quite literally replacing Jesus with this alien who, in every single instance, they're also like Aryans too. They're also blonde, white, blue-eyed, in robes and stuff. I don't know if that's related. It's just a thing that seems to happen a lot. But yeah, and you still see that now. It doesn't make news, but almost the next evolution of that is this. You see the narrative of UFOs evolve over time. It's like, even whenever people see those pill objects that are flying through the sky, a lot of people assume, oh, that's either the government, or the new narrative. It's that it's interdimensional beings. We no longer believe they're from another planet. It's kind of evolved to a more complex mythology that I would argue more people believe. So it's like in its next phase right now.
You got it. Yeah, that was largely innovated. Um, I think in the modern incarnation by an OSS agent based in Switzerland, who you might have heard of, named Carl Jung.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He was actually an advisor to Dulles, and he trained actually several high-level MK Ultra scientists, including Henry Murray. Was put under deep Jungian analysis for years. Henry Murray is the guy who created the Unabomber and ran Harvard's psilocybin project with Timothy Leary. But a lot of these things, and Jung wrote a book on flying saucers, and it was sort of a guide manual for social engineers to create a new priest class, basically, like what you need to know, kind of like what Joseph Campbell was doing with the Changing Images of Man project that he was a part of at the SRI in the 70s. Sort of, they were all participating in the same study of ancient pagan belief structures and superstitions, and how to find the universal traits of various secret stories that could then be retweaked in a modern sort of science age.
And just for people who are listening, Joseph Campbell, people might recognize him, especially if you're into screenwriting. He gave us what a lot of people know is the monomyth, or this belief that every single religious and mythological story follows essentially the same beats. That's what he was saying.
Yep, and there's a lot of truth to that. You know, he's using a lot of the Jungian archetypical archetypes as part of his analysis to look for like what are the universal patterns of various stories of shamanistic cultures and different cultures of the world, to sort of see if you could dilute or extract from that a successful recipe book for new sacred stories in the future. You know, the overcoming of the the shadow demon, whatever it is, the guardian at the threshold idea, that part of the initiation process of within the Grail myths, which was themselves sort of a revamped Eleusinian mystery play of the medieval era, involved the encountering of a guardian at the threshold, which is sort of like our inner shadow, like the and if you fail, you can die. You know, that's part of the thing. As part of the initiation of the higher rites of initiation. If you succeed, it means you've just successfully integrated with your shadow, which is basically transcending all ideas of right and wrong and moral custom, and becoming fully sort of like individuated as a being of pure will. This is like what Aleister Crowley was investigating and participating in with his demonology and his work interfacing with his shadow demons, and coming out victorious, and then developing what he called Thelema, which was channeled to him by one of these creatures, as he says, at least, from his psyche.
Also, you want to talk interesting, I don't even call it a conspiracy theory because it's true, but the connection between Crowley and the CIA, because Crowley was for a long time understood to be effectively in the CIA's pocket.
Yeah, well, he was recruited to MI6 before there was MI6. He was recruited as a young occultist and given a very special experience at Cambridge in the 1890s, and he was brought into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn at its earliest phase, along with people like Bram Stoker, the innovator of erotic death. And so Crowley, yeah, he was working. There's a book called Secret Agent 666, good, decent book, going through his role as a British intelligence agent before, during, and after World War I, and leading up through World War II. Definitely interfaced with American intelligence too, but American intelligence, as I've come to understand it, has been essentially a sub-branch of British intelligence. There's no such thing as American intelligence anymore, as far as my research has led me to understand it. But yeah, Crowley, just like Jung, just like Campbell, are tied on many degrees with occult intelligence operations. I think Crowley directly had a role to play also in the sinking of the Lusitania. He was acting like a double agent, with deep connections to the German High Command, acting like he was a pro-German patriot in America and spy, giving intel. that was given to him because he had handlers from this. I don't want to go off into too many tangents, but it's useful, I guess. There's something called the Sleepy Hollow Country Club that was created by, I think it was William Rockefeller, and it was overseen by the deputy head of MI5, Claude Dancy, who actually ended up creating the Black Chamber, which was the first sort of modern American military intelligence agency that became the NSA. That was the co-founder and second, the deputy head of MI5. So Claude Dancy was running Sleepy Hollow. And you had several leading members of the Eastern establishment that was running out of Sleeping Hollow as a country club in I think it's New York State now. I'm not even too sure about the specific location. That were running Crowley and giving Crowley information from their agents and contacts in the government that were then given to the Germans, who got information that munitions were being sent on the Lusitania passenger ship. And with that information, the neutrality agreement was breached, and the ship was sunk as a way to try to get the U.S. into World War II to save the ass of the British, because they needed America in. So yeah, Crowley was playing some very, very disgusting games while he was developing Thelema, basically the idea of do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, was the essence of Thelema, right? That's the one law. It's basically Satanism.
Yeah, I was about to say a lot of this connects. A lot of these satanic cults seem to be underlined by this one common thing, which is sometimes running towards the obscene and the taboo and the despicable as a wall of fire you pass through to achieve like the ultimate individuality.
Yeah, it's the way to break you free of all of the constraints to your freedom to do whatever you want, which is like, the traditions of your society, the moral ethics and customs, and the belief in God and family and morality. All of these things are like shackles keeping you back from being who you really are. And so you can only do that by breaking your shackles, by integrating with your shadow in a very literal way that involves learning how to love, doing things that are reprehensible. So Crowley has advice on how do you select your best human sacrifice. A young boy who's like a single, like of a lone child with no siblings, of the age of 6 to 7 or something, is what he prescribes as one of the best sacrifices. And then he says, "Oh, I was just joking. Nobody would say that." But it's like, dude, you're a Satanist, and
Yeah,
people do that.
the
So
I was just kidding defense. I've heard that before.
yeah,
And also for people, this sounds like something to some ears that's something that like a pro wrestling villain would do. But as we covered in the there's various cases like the Finders and the Franklin cover up where there's no shortage of regular people who would love to get in on something like this. There's regular everyday people, guys who run banks, guys who run car dealerships, who would love to get a pass to the champagne room of society. And if you told them, well, you're going to have to kill 5 kids, they would probably do. Maybe not a billion, but a couple million people on Earth, at least, I bet, would do that. And maybe you even know a couple. So it's not like it's the craziest thing, because a lot of people find this stuff kind of cool, especially now,
yeah,
in such a fallen state that we're in. And
yeah.
I had one question follow up. You had mentioned the Sleepy Hollow Club. In your research, would most of these clubs, this one was founded by Rockefeller, are they still active? Do you think there might be even more now or less, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, people know of things like Bohemian Grove that's over 130 years old, but itself was, it was a subgroup created on the model of the already existent Monte Verita in Switzerland, Ascona, which was an older, more sort of senior Bohemian Grove in Switzerland, which is still very active today as a center of occult operations. Bohemian Grove is more famous, I guess, but I'd say Ascona is more important. That's where they've a lot of the people have probably seen some of the weird rituals unveiled by the at CERN in
Yeah,
Switzerland.
we didn't get a chance to talk about that on the show, but
Yeah,
I might show that at the next live stream. They did some bizarre shit when they were unveiling CERN. it would make sense if it was boring, but it was like a 40-minute long, anthropomorphic interpretive dance with pagan rituals. It was shockingly strange.
It's so bad, yeah. And so I could say something about that, but I don't want to get derailed too much. But I guess in the quickest way, physics as a whole. See, this is the thing: people don't often understand how physics itself, or the thing we call science, is not. I mean, it's not pure, right? Like the thing we define as science, good practice, or what is good science is I would say the principled battlefront, because who shapes science shapes our understanding of human nature. What is the mind? What is the mind capable of? And there was a battle, like, around the turn of the century. There were a lot of big discoveries happening on the macrocosm, on the microcosm, in chemistry, and you name it. And a lot of big technologies were being developed positively that disproved every time we had a new breakthrough and new freedom to make new technologies in the material world. We all of a sudden were able to leap beyond the limits that were previously there while we were ignorant, which were the Malthusian population constraints. So the empire and all feudalists always want their victims to abide by limits, real or imagined. The limits of the mind is a big one. So when we make discoveries, we disrupt the Malthusian formula of population reduction justifications. So science is a big battlefront. If you get good science and good scientists who really love truth more than their own axioms, it's contagious, and it's very natural, and anybody can do it. And it's not something for an elite. Like the discovery of the laws of nature are there for everybody who has passion and the ability to cultivate the use of their mind as an instrument that can be made better or made worse if they use it unwisely, like any instrument. So there was a fight that peaked, I would say, in the 1920s in Solvay. There was a series of conferences, and you had the actual scientists who were called considered the old guard: Madame Curie, Max Planck, and Einstein, and people who actually had made real discoveries that were like provable. And then you had the new mathematicians, followers of people like Bertrand Russell, and a lot of these newer mathematicians circled a figure named Niels Bohr, who was, in my understanding, he was an occultist. People like Oppenheimer too. They were people who didn't. They called themselves scientists, but they were more mathematical probability theorists who denied the possibility of truth because in their view, all we could know was probability, was maybes, and so they put that type of filter onto the minds of anybody dumb enough to follow them as the guides into what science is. Now, the thing about all of these people like Heisenberg and the Copenhagen School of under Bohr and so many others, they never made any discoveries. They created descriptive models, which might have had a limited amount of practical use, but a very limited amount. But they didn't make discoveries. It was only description. And so they wanted to say science, and this is where the idea that science is not about discovering why things are, but only discovering how things are within degrees of probability. That's a contamination. And the fact that occultists, often tied to theosophical agencies, are all over this mess. They derailed science, and that's when people kind of make fun of Einstein for not being able to adapt to the new reality that God does play dice with the universe. God is a gambler. He refused to accept that because he was like, no, I made discoveries of things that I can hold on to that I know are true, and it wasn't based on a maybe thing. And so anyway, this is what became the funding mechanism, or the driver for things like tokamaks, particle accelerators, all this stuff. So science was induced to become crazier and crazier over several generations, where increasingly multiple dimensions that you could never prove, but existed because the math, like this theory of string theory requires 13 dimensions. This other version of it requires 19 dimensions. This other one has 833,000 versions or dimensions to justify. Again, like I said, things that are only mathematical fictions created to make an elegant model but have no testability function. And so,
It's interesting, for anyone who wants to peer into this,
yeah,
every so often I'll kind of dip into the sphere of theoretical physics. All these people have YouTube channels as well. You can peer into these debates, for example, like Stephen Wolfram and who's that guy, Eric Weinstein. Like a lot of these guys who are into theoretical physics, they're just hammering string theory for the exact reason you have said, which is like it doesn't work. It might have worked. It's been 20 years of you guys fucking around. Why are you doing this?
it,
And I
yeah,
also wanted to mention, I just want to call people's attention. There's a phrase you had said that I want to underline, which is science destroys the Malthusian limits of the mind, leading to a population explosion. I just think that's worth repeating because I never heard that before. It's a very interesting way of looking at it. And
yeah, it's
also
really, yeah,
remarking on Einstein, sorry, just before I forget, I love the sort of demarcation you had given there between type of scientist that doesn't exist anymore because Einstein's a good example, but also Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a very, very serious thinker who, and him and Einstein, like we just said, seriously considered the implications, the philosophical implications of what they had discovered. They would take these and try and at least ascertain the impact of what it was. And I think that is completely missing to your point. There is no consideration whatsoever in the metaphysics of it all because that was an alien to scientists back then. And the further you go back to even around the Enlightenment era, like there was a much more synergy between people who had a keen interest in the materialist sciences, but also philosophy and the metaphysics of it. Like to separate those two wouldn't occur to them, but that occurs now. You have to keep them separate, and that's how you get all this weird shit.
yeah, and it's there's a lot of things I could say to what you just said, but I think the point that I'll touch upon is there's always going to be a metaphysical implication to anything physical that you say and talk about. No matter how much people want to deny it, it's implicit, right? Even if people deny that there's an ontological truth, as the statistical probability theorists all assert that there's no truth, it's like, well, that's already a metaphysical statement. The denial of something like a universal is itself, you're trying to universalize a negation of a universal. So it's already a metaphysical thing you can't prove. So, the positivists, the radical empiricists, they have an implicit metaphysics, though they won't admit it. So they're just not consistent with themselves. That's one thing. But I would say on a higher level, those who brought in and organized the Solvay conference and the derailing of science knew a little bit more what they were doing. And part of the way, so the two best ways to undermine science, number one is to destroy it completely. But that doesn't always, like the old, burn it all down, burn through Inquisition or whatever, those who are making discoveries or might make discoveries. If that doesn't work and discoveries are still happening, the next best thing to do is try to subvert it from within. Say, co-opt it and redefine what the thing is that you actually don't want people understanding. So that's part of what the Rosicrucian movement was doing. A bunch of the Kabbalists who took over control of Britain and turned it more and more into an empire over the course, especially of people like Henry VIII. And, he had a bunch of Kabbalistic advisors like Francesco Zorzi, who oversaw the creation of things like the Anglican Church schism. And these networks, often you'll find when you scratch on that surface, and people like Webster Tarpley did some really good work on this, are going to bring you directly into the Venetian high command. A lot of the old Venetian black nobility that were the carryovers of the controllers of the Roman Empire will be found there.
And just to call people's attention, if that is what I think it is, that you have this article on your site called "The Anglo-Venetian Roots of the Deep State." Would that be related to that?
Yeah, that's a book I wrote, volume 4 of my Clash of the Two Americas series, and that's a good intro book for people who want to get their first degree sort of like teeth into the thing. That's a good book to start with. But yeah, we often hear of people like John Dee, a leading occultist, numerologist who ran intelligence under Queen Elizabeth, people like Francis Bacon, another intelligence operative, pseudoscientist, occultist. There's a lot. There's Robert Flood. There's a whole network of these people who, they gave rise to what's known as the Invisible College. These were Rosicrucians. They were the ones carrying out the Eleusinian mystery initiation ceremonies in caverns that gave rise to things like the Hellfire Club that had on the cavern under Francis Dashwood's estate when people would enter into one of these things. And this is where you had a lot of the eyes wide shut ceremonies going on and other things under the Medmenham manor. It basically said, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." That was the engraving that's still there. Tourists can go and see that. All of the leaders of the British Empire were members of this thing during the most evil transition periods. And when you look at the birth of the Royal Society, which tried to gain a monopoly over what is good practice in science, that's entirely run by occultists who are managing things like Isaac Newton, and that's not even slander. I'm not making, like, people can back this up. Isaac Newton, as John Maynard Keynes pointed out, was not the first of the modern scientists as people believed. He wrote John Maynard Keynes, who bought the chest of Newton papers, which was all alchemical witchcraft and numerology. He said he was actually the last of the Babylonian priests. And he had handlers, he had managers who were stealing ideas that were being made and discoveries that were being made by people like Gottfried Leibniz and people like Kepler and Huygens, and real discoverers and real continental scientists, even British scientists. There were some really good ones like Flamsteed and Stephen Gray, who were making real great discoveries in electromagnetism and things like that. And they were plagiarized, stolen, and turned into formulas that could be just accessed through memory and memorization, but not understanding of what made the discovery, that eureka, possible. And it was then given an association with a controlled figure like a Newton, who said, "I don't make hypotheses, and neither should you. And if anybody wants to be a real discoverer like me, you should not make hypotheses." And that's one of the first rules of reasoning of Newton in his Principia. So as soon as you do that, you're mentally castrated. You're screwed. You can't make a discovery if you don't make hypotheses, right? So this is, but people would still make discoveries despite these derailments. And in the 20th century, especially with the Solvay Conference, they want to sort of keep the fruits of great science for the use of the oligarchy, the wannabe masters of the universe, but to keep it as mysterious as possible, they have to sort of smear it with a thick coating of crazy. And this is where things like the multiple dimensional people have wasted their whole careers and billions of dollars of resources in exploring new models of string theory and variations on the theme, which, again, it's not provable. And it opens up the door to philosophical speculations of interdimensional beings that we can then communicate with, and which is why people like Jacques Vallée is a member of what's called in the 60s the Invisible College. It was a take directly on the old Rosicrucian Invisible College of the occultists running the Royal Society of the 17th, 18th centuries. And it was rebranded or retooled, repurposed under a bunch of quantum physicists, Jacques Vallée, and also anthropologists and CIA analysts like J. Allen Hynek was the founder of this modern Invisible College. He became one of the pioneers of alien disclosure. He was interfacing with people like Carl Jung, and one of his prodigies was this fellow named Jacques Vallée. And Jacques Vallée is still alive. He's a very big figure in the UFO disclosure movement, and he's the one who innovated this idea of interdimensional extraterrestrial hypotheses in this late 60s with his Prisoner to Magonia or something. Prisoner to Magonia? Anyway, it's a book where he first lays out in a popular fashion that aliens are not from our dimension, but from other dimensions, and that, you can better access these other dimensions by putting the brain on what MK Ultra was doing. It's the different psychedelic drugs.
Yeah, and also I'm reminded of the sharp rise in awareness of DMT over the past few years. And that seems to, the one thing everyone says about DMT is it lets you communicate with interdimensional beings. They call them machine elves, but it seems to be that everyone gets into it because they want to do this one thing, which is talk to interdimensional beings.
Which makes it more sacred. It's less, that's how they justify it. There's like sacred orgies. There's like the vulgar orgies and the vulgar drug use, which is just, they look down on that. They're like, no, that's not for us. We're into the sacred orgies and the sacred drug use. So we're doing it for different, we don't want to just get high. We want to talk to spirit beings. So for us, it's okay. It's actually beautiful, a beautiful thing. Um, so you get this weird arrogance in the whole self delusion of grandeur that the people, these cultish figures start feeling in their heart, which is conducive to the whole, integrating with the shadow and starting to learn how to maybe, channel beings by doing things that normal humans would find reprehensible, but maybe on that higher level of higher truths that are beyond good and evil, maybe these sacrifices, or whatever Pizzagate type of things you can imagine are actually kind of beautiful, maybe, and so you get this weird world that they start justifying it by science. But science says, look at quantum mechanics and neuroscience. They'll come up with their own peer-reviewed papers that then justify how there's scientific backing to their plunge into this drug-laced ecstasy or another, and how everything is possible. Because again, quantum mechanics says everything may be, and multiple universes. There's as many possibilities of things that could be actually are, and there are universes where I can turn into a purple hippopotamus with wings that flies through walls. And because I can imagine it, it is possible. Because it is possible, there is another reality that is out there where that is possible and is happening. And then, you got Marvel Comics and culture promoting like multiverses shit
Yes,
too.
I
And
was
it
going to
drives
get
people
to
nuts.
that, which is interesting because I like to see how all of this filters down to the whole middle of the bell curve. Regular people who are not into weird stuff like we are. And the average person of maybe a middling IQ has a pretty comprehensive understanding of a multiverse theory, which is shocking. And it's interesting that, if you explain this to someone who was living 100 years ago, their mind would contort. But your layperson has understanding of interdimensional selves interacting through gravity sometimes. And I'm like, what impact does that have on people? And I always come back to maybe this is a through line through what we're talking about, which is over time the public's not only tolerance of this, but maybe enthusiastic support. Like those people who are partaking in these terrible sacred rituals, some people might think, well, those are the people who drive culture, so maybe they should do that, and you see like all the Jeffrey Epstein spirit cooking stuff, and people are like, well, maybe that's cool, maybe that is beautiful, that's already kind of started. And one thing I was thinking about this earlier as you were talking about Bohemian Grove. Like I remember within my lifetime how Bohemian Grove was treated as this thing only insane people thought about. Then it was something that people said, well, it exists, but it's not what you think. It's completely normal. And now people know it's real and think it's weird, but they just think it's all right. And just the example I have there is I saw an interview with Kid Rock on Joe Rogan, America's Kid Rock, MAGA superstar. He's talking about how he went to Bohemian Grove just as a
What?
guest. This would have been recent, and he's on there. Joe Rogan, he's all about this stuff, or used to be. And then Kid Rock's like, yeah, it's no big deal. And they're like, oh, did they have the cremation of care? It's like, yeah, but whatever. I'm like, okay, well, lighting a giant owl deity on fire, that's weird. And you're in robes. And he's like, yeah, but whatever. I'm like, it's strange to see someone like that just admitting that it's all true. People, all the richest people get together and do that, but whatever, who cares? I'm like, I don't know. If you explained that to me 15 years ago, I would have never believed anyone would be open with that, but now they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Me too. It's shocking, and less, I guess, shocking, but not surprising. Unfortunately, the when you start looking at a lot of the things we've taken for granted, we were talking about science and like common tropes of what we believe science to be, and we're told, there are all these godheads of science. Stephen Hawking's like this almost like demigod, figure, and who's buried right between Newton and Darwin, and like there are these untouchable sort of this pantheon of secular sort of deities, as I see it, who are not making discoveries. They're making models, descriptive models, and they're tied to occult intelligence networks, or even Hawking's. Like this guy's paraplegic. I don't even think that he was, you know, I don't think he was necessarily even believing the things that they had coming out of the robot or the interpreter in the 80s, when he would just mumble things like Chewbacca, and you'd have an interpreter before he had his robot machinery, going through these elaborate expositions of like string theory and the universe and everything. And, this guy was just, again, sounding like Chewbacca. So that's probably a bit of a sick joke, but he's also going to Epstein Island too. I mean, there are weird things there.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. You always hear, like, why is Stephen Hawking going to Epstein Island?
I
Maybe it
don't
is
know,
something.
dude.
Maybe it is something weird.
It's just weird. Like, I don't know what kind of physical pleasure somebody like that can have, but it's weird that we know what Epstein is, kind of, but even there, it's like, why do you have this Babylonian style temple on your island? What's below the island? What's in the, what there's stories, but it obviously is tied to the sorts of things that have gone public in recent years, like Jimmy Savile and the vast array of pedophilia networks that are tied to the British aristocracy and senators or lords, I should say, and members of parliament, and that's all public. That's like not even conspiracy theory stuff. So that's we're talking about some science stuff. We're talking about some culture stuff. But if you look at the culture as a whole, very little of the stuff is untainted by artificial manipulation by intelligence agencies that wanted to create perverse dynamics of passions and aesthetics, especially at the end of World War II, when things like the Congress for Cultural Freedom was created by people like Arthur Koestler, who was, again, working with the CIA as a cultural social engineer. Bertrand Russell was a part of this, the founder of the neoconservative movement, a former Trotskyite named...
Was it Leo Strauss?
No, but he also was involved with this network. But no, I'm thinking of Burnham, James Burnham.
James. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a co-founder of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and this is a cover, an excuse to pour hundreds of millions of dollars of CIA money that was mostly taken from German Nazi gold and fascist Japanese gold, and was self-funded. To be a black budget off the books, agency that promoted the growth of things like modern art, abstract art, contemporary art, atonal music, existential nihilistic literature that people would otherwise have normally thought was just, existential trash, not worth 2 cents. All of a sudden got huge patronage, and it created a new fake demand that a supply was then created to satisfy, whereby schools, universities began modifying their philosophy of teaching of what good art is, what good literature is, and people wanted the grants. So they started tuning their hearts to become creators of productions that would then make them fame, make them, get them the grants, whatever. But ultimately just kept on adding to the rotten entropy of civilization, because the logic of the CIA running this thing was, the Cold War is created a new divide, and so they falsely said communism is going to be, we're going to define the art and aesthetics of the communist world order as being realism, which is tied to like strict obedience to perceived truth that's imposed. And so the art of freedom, of democracy, will be abstract irrationalism, emotions liberated from the tyranny of logic and of reason. And so they created this weird Manichaean dualism in society. And then you could just see how this fed back into the training of economists, the science of basically, managing human production, consumption. The economists became increasingly, you can kill more people with the stroke of a pen as an economist, as John Perkins said, right? Working for the World Bank, than you can as a dictator of Angola. And then the scientists were also increasingly tuned to an irrational universe of ugliness that then shaped how they then constructed their scientific experiments and the models that they chose to try to generate to justify a metaphysical because again, we all have hypotheses, even if we don't admit it, we do. And so they started, tuning the science, building your particle accelerators or your tokamaks to make data happen to fit the models. They weren't trying to follow what the universe was saying. They were starting to try to manipulate the universe to make it fit the mathematical models, which is a very egotistical, godlike hubris that has sort of, it's the do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, right? Like there's no higher law than my desires for the world to be as I want it to be, says Aleister Crowley or the Hellfire Club. And that's what sort of became the ethic of the baby boomers, right? Just live in the now, just let it be. That's just, forget about the future, forget about the past, just live for pleasure. And the baby boomers got really, not all of them, but a lot of them really got run through the mud and brainwashed by this thing. And it's really taken its toll.
And one thing we come back to, I discussed this on a podcast appearance I made recently on a show called History Homos, but they're big into conspiracy theories. And one thing that we were discussing the book Days of Rage, and a lot of these interferences on sort of revolutionary movements with government institutions. And one thing that sort of threaded through the entire thing was that none of this stuff went away. MK Ultra didn't go away. A lot of these intrusions of Eastern mysticism, they never really went away. But there's this pervasive sort of belief that yeah, we were kind of crazy in the 60s and 70s, but then everything went back to normal. It's like, no, none of this stuff went away. The KGB never went away. Like a lot of these groups that we talked about once, they like people like the Satanic Panic. Like everyone was obsessed with satanic child sacrifice for a while. Then we stopped. It's like that never stopped, and things just keep going forward and we kind of acclimate to it. I think that's where we are right now with a lot of these things where there's more people who kind of understand this stuff, but have made themselves okay with it. And that to me is troubling. And just to cycle back to the UFO thing, like everyone kind of knows that something shady is going on with UFOs, but they're almost, and maybe this is the culmination of all this work where people are so nihilistic right down to their core that they're just kind of tolerating it. And just to end it on this, because I know we got to get going soon. There's this great book. People are probably tired of me referencing it, but it was called Decadence by Jim Haugen. It's about the 60s counterculture. And he said one thing that it didn't evolve from the Beat generation and the counterculture movement and the hippie stuff. That was all like a bunch of different things together. But he said like the Beat generation was convinced that everything's going to end soon and whatever, act accordingly. But something interesting happened with the boomers. Something interesting happened with that particular counterculture that never went away, which is that the end of the world is coming and we can help shepherd it. And that was sort of the age of Aquarius stuff. But if you look at the tone of a lot of the counterculture movements, like, yeah, everyone's going to fall apart. Let's help guide the collapse. Let's almost run towards apocalypse. And as we're talking, I'm thinking that seems relevant. That seems and that never went away. We, to this day, because the boomers have never left us, and they really defined a lot of the culture we've got right now. Culturally, and in our shared consciousness, there still seems to be this nihilism of we feel like it's okay to run towards the apocalypse or the end of everything. And I'm like, I don't know how we break from that, but that does seem very corrupted.
Oh yeah, no, I know, and I just watched the musical Hair, which is sort of like the anthem for the age of Aquarius. You ever see that movie?
I know what it is, but I've never seen it. I think they did like a remake with John Travolta recently, but like
a while ago. Yeah,
yeah.
Well, there was I saw.
I'm thinking of Hairspray. What the fuck am I talking about?
No, it's Hair. Yeah. This is the dawning of the
I know that
age
song.
of-
Yeah.
Yeah, but the whole thing is a complete Luciferian anthem for the New Age in a way that, on the one hand, it has this seduction because it's a protest piece against the Vietnam War, but at the same time, it is ushering in this new post-Christian age. And you have like hosts. There's a point where all the hippies are like kneeled down getting hosts, which are LSD capsules and stuff produced by MK Ultra, and the whole CIA, MI6, Tavistocky, and social engineers are generating this stuff. They're generating DMT. They're putting it out there into the campuses, and you could just see how it's a recipe. While at the same time, they're pushing this right-wing, hardcore fascist drive for unnecessary wars in Korea and Vietnam. They're working with unreconstructed Nazis, unreconstructed French fascists who have a lot of experience running guerrilla warfare and paramilitary operations in Vietnam, who then start advising Green Berets, working with the U.S. government in basically creating a new. And I'm starting to see the Vietnam War itself as an entire occult initiation ceremony. A lot of the leading Satanists, like Michael Aquino, who ran the Temple of Set coming out of the Church of Satan in the 70s and was part of the revolution in military affairs that brought in psychedelics. It brought in mind wars. He wrote a paper called Mind Wars that was brought in by General Stubblebeam into reorganizing the entire U.S. military that gave rise to Desert Storm and every insane thing afterwards. They brought in the spoon benders. They brought in the quantum physicists as well to train soldiers to like blow up a goat's heart by staring at it with intention, or running through a wall by aligning your electrons in your body with the wall through meditation and transcendental sort of, theosophical meditation practices. And this was done. It was actually applied. This is what Zbigniew Brzezinski and Samuel P. Huntington called for and oversaw with the Revolution in Military Affairs strategy that was, again, done with the justification both of or support by pseudoscientist mathematicians, often tied to Stanford and Berkeley, but especially the Stanford SRI, Research Institute, that was also creating the Changing Images of Man operation under Harman and Joseph Campbell. And the whole idea was how to change man's self-image of himself, of ourselves, to accommodate a new post-Christian, pagan, superstitious age. And that was the age of Aquarius. And so many boomers didn't realize how they were played to be. It was a typical problem reaction solution. You create an unjust war. You send off a whole bunch of young people who don't know what the fuck is going on. Their friends are coming back in body bags. Of course, you're going to be able to have a predictive response where they'll go crazy if you give them enough drugs and nihilistic philosophy. And they'll think that they're great heroes in the golden generation for resisting the big war. And then they don't realize that. And also, for those who did go into the war, a lot of them are going to die. And those who don't die are going to come back super drugged up or broken. And then there will be a select grouping that will have killed. They'll have done the unhuman things in Vietnam, killing women, children, cutting off ears, going like Apocalypse Now, Marlon Brando, and they will be this is sort of what Milner did with the Boer War in the South African War. That's how they created and initiated their higher elect of the Round Table movement of Lord Milner, Amory. Is you create these wars to be the cauldron in which dehumanizing acts that involve risking one's life as well are granted to initiates to then change their identities and then come out of the war in it as new priests or managers of the empire. And they did that in the Vietnam War. They did that with Desert Storm, with the wars in terrorism after 9/11. So it's part of one of the aspects of the necessity of forever wars is to create this ongoing initiation process of killing children and other things. But I don't fully blame the baby boomers for having gotten pulled into this thing and gotten duped. But I mean, now we're coming to the breaking point of the system, and things are really coming to a head. So I know we're hitting the top of the hour, but people have to be a lot more disciplined with their thinking at this point. What they think is animating or their convictions and what their minds are capable of doing. People have a lot more power if they choose to use it to be very rigorous minds, but they can't be sloppy. If we continue to allow ourselves to be sloppy thinkers, we're going to give our support to traps that will usher in hell on earth.
It's amazing. Every single thing we've talked about, we could spend another full hour on. We talked about a whole wide array of topics. And I know you go into depth more on your site and more on your Substack articles and whatnot. And I would love to speak to you again sometime soon, because we didn't get to a couple of things I really wanted to talk about too. But I wanted to remind people, if they want to find more, you can find them. I'm just going to read a couple of your byline here on Twitter as well, because I missed a couple of things. Senior fellow at American University in Moscow, founder not only of Canadian Patriot Review, but the Rising Tide Foundation, and the author of The Untold History of Canada, among other great. You can find out all your books on your site, PDFs, and the short films that you were just discussing. And You can find his Substack is matthewehret.substack.com, on Twitter at Ehret, EHRET _Matthew. I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time. This has been a phenomenal talk. I really enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, it was great. I think we packed in a lot in that 60 minutes. We literally did 60 minutes. This is
all
great.
right. I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right, take care. Bye.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.